The Old West is never short on its history of tall tales. What hadn't survived to the modern era, still told around the Boy Scout campfire, might still be found in dusty newspapers and journals. Many of our generation can remember a grandfather or great uncle over the Thanksgiving turkey telling of the old man they once knew who had found a mine full of Spanish gold, or had seen the ghostly silhouette of an Indian riding by in the moonlight. Pleasant Green, Utah, known modernly as Magna, in its territorial days, didn't miss out on its share of strange tales. Coon's Canyon, slightly south of Pleasant Green, in the Ochre Mountains, once wintered an army, provided lumber and firewood to early pioneer settlers, and nourished and watered herds of cattle for generations, until it had been closed to the public by industrial interests. Today it's a mysterious place, which might still produce a button or gold coin, or reveal ancient petroglyphs to the adventurous. It also holds a strange history, which has recently come to light in fading ink on the brittle pages of the July 30th, 1873 issue of the Deseret News. According to the report, a Mr. Edward R. Walker, described as a stout, strong man, about 34 years of age, who has been used to mountain life, and apparently as sound in mind as strong in body, called upon the Deseret News and made an extraordinary statement. Not much is known about Edward R. Walker. No known photograph has been found, nor a journal or personal history. Though he lived in the 16th Ward of Salt Lake City, he had family ties into Pleasant Green through the Abraham Coon family, many of whom had settled a small village at the mouth of the canyon called Coonville, which had joined Pleasant Green in its official establishment as a county precinct a year later. Edward was the son of James Walker and Martha Mary Coon, Abraham Coon's sister. He had had a brief marriage to Eliza Marie Howes. A son, Edward Marion Walker, was born in 1867 and was 6 years old at the time of the story. Marriage records show that Eliza was no longer married to Edward by then. In his statement, Walker told the Deseret News that on the 16th of July, he had gone to Coon's Canyon with his brother Sylvester, and together with their cousin, John Coon, were felling timber for the sawmill in the right-hand fork of the canyon. John Coon was the son of Abraham Coon, and he ran the Coon Ranch at the mouth of the canyon. He also helped his father, Abraham, who had worked as a road supervisor for the Salt Lake County, build and maintain the Coon's Canyon Road. His farm was just east of the corner of 8400 West and 4100 South on what is now Alliant Tech Systems Incorporated, ATK, on the banks of Coons Creek. Walker said that between 10 and 12 in the morning, a deer ran by. He snatched up a Sharp's rifle and started in pursuit. About a mile into the chase, he was startled by a loud, shrill whistle and hiss. Indians were still often seen in the Ochre Mountains, and thinking one was nearby, he stopped and looked about. He turned to the noise of rocks rattling, when to his horror he saw approaching, at a very rapid rate, a serpent, which he judged was between 30 and 40 feet long, and about 10 inches through the body. The reptile's head was raised fully 6 feet from the ground, and his jaws were open 15 or 18 inches wide, with large fangs growing from both upper and lower jaw. Terrified, Walker tried to run. The serpent jumped at and knocked him down, striking him on the left shoulder just below the shoulder blade. With a speed inspired by the deadliest fear, Walker rose to his feet and attempted to make his way to the top of the ridge, but stumbled and immediately felt the weight of his monstrous pursuer gliding over his body and sliding off at a tremendous rate where it twined itself around a large mountain mahogany tree. He made his way back to his companions as quickly as he could. He said they wanted to return and hunt for the serpent, but he was too weak from fright and excitement to do so, but later told the paper that they intended in a very short time to return on an expedition to hunt it. No record has been left behind of whether or not they had. Walker's stories seemed to become more fantastic with each paragraph, of a serpent that that slapped its tail on the rocks and waved its head to and fro, yellow in color, a black mark like a half-moon on each side of his eyes, a beard or fuzz around his mouth, a crown-shaped mass on the top of his head, 6 inches high, being green, blue, white, yellow, and red. Its head about as large as that of a full-grown bulldog, and in shape between that of a bulldog and monkey. Its body covered with scales 6 or 8 inches long. The writers of the article were not subtle in their attitude about the story. They wrote, "While he was telling it, we asked him to allow us to feel his pulse, but it was perfectly natural. Neither it nor any glare in the eye indicating the least degree of mental aberration. At the risk of offending him, his statement being a pretty strong one, we asked him if he had been drinking and had got snakes in his boots at the time of the adventure. He assured us he was perfectly sober, that every word he told was true, and in proof showed the bruise on his shoulder caused by the blow he received from the serpent." Along with Walker's story, the reporters also added a light-hearted reference to the Bear Lake Monster and quoted a letter published 11 years before in the Deseret Weekly News, September 3, 1862, that told of an Indian brave and squaws who had gone into the mountains east of Spring Lake Villa in the southern part of Utah County to pick berries. The next day they returned frightened and refusing at first to say why. Eventually the Indian came forward with a most troubling story. On the other side of the mountain they had come upon a trail of something appearing as though a timber had been dragged along. He crossed the trail, going higher, and saw the head of some living thing peeping over a rock at him. Before he could run, a snake, as thick through as a man's body, 10 to 20 feet long, sprang towards him. After several dodges, he was able to escape. He described it as having horns that curved back over its head, and that it would raise its head to the height of a man. If the following letter to the editor is any good sample of the public's reaction to Walker's and other such stories, it certainly is worth a careful read. Written in a style reminiscent of Mark Twain's, to the Salt Lake Herald-Republican, August 23, 1873. A fellow presenting his name as L. Gee declared the Coon's Canyon monster caught. Editor's Herald. Your correspondent refers to a publication in a late issue of the News of a wonderful snake story by one H. Walker of Coon's Canyon. That snake has been caught and killed by J.B. Ladd, J.S. Munn, and myself while on an excursion to Salt Lake on the 19th instant. We had just donned our clothes after having enjoyed a bathe in the lake at Black Rock when our eyes were greeted with a sight of the hideous monster. The wind was blowing a brisk gale from the north, and at times the monster's head arose 4 feet from the water as it approached the shore. Our first impression was to run, when Ladd, braver than the others, drew his revolver and fired, but without visible effect. The reptile still nearing us, with head erect and eyes shooting forth fire, while its mouth was stretched open, displaying a set of tusks, forked and terrible to gaze upon. Ladd's bravery seemed to fill us all with courage, and seizing our pistols, we kept up a quick and constant firing into the bulky and slimy carcass of the fast-approaching monster, until our ammunition was exhausted. Yet his course had not been turned, nor his progress stayed. All hope of preserving our lives left us, and dropping on the ground, we awaited with breathless silence the moment when we would be forever lost to the world and its free lunches. lying on the ground, our eyes riveted on the approaching creature. We had a fine opportunity of viewing his proportions, etc. And we afterwards found that our eyes, although covered with a mist of death, had been correct as to measurements and other points. The body, about 16 feet long and 8 inches in diameter, was covered with a rough, knotty-like skin of a green, slimy appearance. The head was the same size and seemed a continuation of the body. The only means for knowing it was the head was the small red eyes and the huge mouth filled with massive hooked teeth. While we were thus gazing on this fury of the deep, it gave a spring and landed high and dry on the shore. And as it did so, our eyes closed, and we commenced to murmur, "Now I lay me down to sleep." How long we would have lain there will never be known. Probably until supper time, had not Lad, brave man, opened his eyes and discovered that the monster was a railroad tie, which had probably been a couple of years afloat.